both there, thanks. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Were these the ones that wouldn't open? So this is another email with more documents? Oh, yeah, they're working hard on this.
Oh, you got one? You got one already?
I called from the road the other day. Because I was trying to, I thought, now I'll knock it out on Friday.
Did you get both of our things, the agenda and the guide? Or just one?
Oh, I just got
Just one? I think it's the one I use anyway.
yeah, that's all you need.
Yeah.
I never use the guide. Just
You couldn't tell by the
let it roll.
100 pages. That we received yesterday.
I'm amazed by how many were on the list. Well, it's quarter of.
Start it. Let it rip.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. We're going to begin our public caucus on housing in the city of Scranton. Mayor Cognetti, if you would start, and then as the speakers, whoever wants to speak, if you would state your name and then what position you hold and where for us.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Yeah, we're excited to come here. There's nothing specific to housing or affordability per se on your agenda. We just thought it was a good thing to bring representatives from different organizations that work on housing on a daily basis to council, both for council but also for the public, to walk through the state of affairs with housing. Now, Scranton is not the only city where housing affordability is an issue. This is top of mind across the nation. Every mayor that I speak to, this is the most important issue, if not at least the top three that mayors are thinking about, because housing availability and affordability is just a real crunch across the board nationally. So we have a variety of ways that we're looking at this at the city level. Right now, we have a housing needs assessment going on. We've partnered with the Scranton Area Foundation and a company called Forsyth. They're looking at what Scranton needs for housing. What is the need and the gap that we have? So that assessment will be coming back to us soon. And then we also have an unsheltered task force. We meet quarterly, sometimes monthly, depending on how things are going. We had a meeting in January. We have another meeting in March to get together. So everyone at this table touches the unsheltered task force, but we also have institutions like the Catherine McCauley Center, Women's Resource Center, the COC, other places. So today I just wanted to bring a subset of the housing groups and the unsheltered task force to talk through the challenges that individuals are facing, to hear some of those stories, to get the numbers and hear what, AARP, for example, wasn't able to be here, but what somebody living on a fixed income is really looking at when they are looking at their bills. And I know that you all sitting on council and the public are very much attuned to this right now as we fight the PAWC water rate hike. So this to me is a carryover to that effort where we're trying to fight the utilities pieces. We need to really have a clear picture of what housing needs and affordability looks like. We know that there's a real gap out there in terms of availability and affordability. So with that, we can just kind of go down the line and everyone can introduce themselves.
Before we start, you said there's a housing needs assessment. Who's completing that?
So it's the Scranton Area Foundation is actually running that. They're working with Forsyth, and we're at the table.
Okay, how is that funded? Did the city fund some of that, or is that being independently funded?
I believe it's fully funded through the Weinberg Foundation, but we can double check on that for you.
All right. And Marie, that was the housing needs assessment? The housing needs assessment? Okay.
Yes, yes.
They couldn't hear in the back.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Got it. Okay, so, yeah. We've got acoustic. All right, Harry, do you want to start?
Good evening, I am Gary Lyons of Caucus Social Services. I am the supervisor.
We need you to turn the mics on if you
Oh.
could when you're speaking.
I'm sorry. My name is Harry Lyons. I am with Catholic Social Services. I am the supervisor of St. Anthony's Haven Homeless Shelter over on Olive Street.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm Karl Lynott at the Scranton Housing Authority, and I'm the Executive Director. And I'm right across the street from City Hall here.
Good evening, Andrew Cutillo, the Deputy Solicitor here at the City of Scranton.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shaquera Martindale. I am the current Executive Director of the Scranton Redevelopment Authority.
Good evening. My name is Teri Ooms, and I'm the President and CEO of the Institute. The Institute's a private nonprofit data analytics and research organization in northeastern Pennsylvania that's a collaboration of all of the higher education institutions and the business community in Lackawanna and Luzerne County.
You're the one we got the 12,000 pages of literature from yesterday.
Guilty.
I'm Lisa Durkin. I'm the President and CEO of United Neighborhood Centers and United Neighborhood Community Development Corporation.
So speaking of that, so we got about, I'd say, at least 5 studies completed by the Institute. I know that we did contract with the Institute for some work. Were all of these studies contracted through the city, or are these independent studies?
No, they're independent studies. Our organization's primary mission is to conduct community-based research, and so all of the studies that you have in front of you were part of that community-based research program, and that funding for our organization comes through grants and donations and different types of underwriting and sponsorships.
Thank you.
So I'll have everybody kind of give their few minutes. I'll just give a couple notes since Tresa Osborne from AARP couldn't be here. She's so great. She sent her prepared remarks to you all, so you have them, as well as a little one-pager on what AARP's plans are for housing. The thing that really sticks out to me is the affordability gap. So I'll read from the AARP's document here. Housing that meets a range of income levels are in low supply, which means many households must sacrifice in other areas of their budgets, such as paying for prescription drugs and purchasing groceries. So this is Pennsylvania-wide. In Pennsylvania, the average Social Security retired worker benefit is $1,601 per month, or $19,200 annually, and the average Social Security disabled worker benefit is $1,282 per month, about $15,400 annually. Housing expenses make up the lion's share of a household's budget, and rising housing costs mean less money for other basic daily necessities. This is particularly challenging for those on fixed incomes. While federal rental assistance like housing choice vouchers, public housing, Section 8 project-based, supportive elderly disabled, USDA rural rental assistance helps struggling older adults, persons with disabilities, veterans, and working families to keep a roof over their heads, 4 in 10 low-income Pennsylvanians are homeless or pay over half their income for rent, and most do not receive federal rental assistance due to limited funding. So that's just a snapshot of what AARP focuses on in terms of those living on fixed income. So it's important, I think, for when we talk about housing affordability, housing needs, and the conversation can get away from the data and the real dollars. So I wanted to kind of anchor that conversation again on some of these numbers. We've been talking about numbers when we talk about the water rate increase. I think we think about the inability for so many of our residents, really all of us, to afford to pay those increased water costs, utilities costs. The same thing is going on with housing with an even higher rate, arguably. So with that, we can just go down the line. Maybe, Harry, you can kick us off and tell us about how things are going.
Sure. Sorry. St. Anthony's Haven is a 26-bed homeless shelter. We're open every night from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 365 nights a year. Last year, we served 551 unduplicated individuals for over 6,000 nights of service. We are always fairly busy, and that depends on the weather in a real way. But the thing that strikes me that people should know, and that strikes me the most, is how much the face of homelessness has changed just in the last several years. When I made the jump from youth services to homeless services in 2012, almost everyone you dealt with had an addiction problem and or a mental health problem. Today, that is not the case. The majority of people in the shelter are people who are working, who just can't afford housing. It's a real problem. Last night, for example, it was a fairly slow night. We had 12 individuals in the shelter. 5 of those individuals had full-time employment. 1 was working 2 part-time jobs. 2 were getting Social Security retirement. 1 was getting Social Security disability. 1 is starting his job on Monday, and 1 was working part-time. So that is, 9 out of 12 are working, and that's what we see anymore, is working people who just can't afford a place. Rents have gone up so much, and somebody who's making $1,200 a month can't pay a $1,200 a month rent. It just doesn't work.
Now, when it comes to staying at the shelter, is there a time limit to where these individuals can stay, or any kind of stipulations as to how long they could stay there?
Yes, sir. Once you're in the shelter, you can stay for 30 nights as long as you're a Lackawanna County resident. If you're not local, the best we can give you is 3 nights as a courtesy. But if you are a county resident, you can stay up to 30 nights in the shelter. If you're doing everything you need to, you're working, you've applied for housing, you're doing everything, we can get you a 15-night extension in most cases. But 45 is really where it maxes out.
Okay. How do they prove the residence, or just their last address?
Yeah, last address. We can prove residence. The easiest way to do it is with a driver's license or a state ID. But an old piece of mail. Most of the clients coming through are getting some sort of public assistance benefits, and they could do a Compass printout or a printout from other services they've gotten in the HMIS system. Something that goes back, we look to go back about 6 months to prove residency.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question, so you're stating that 45 days is probably the max that they're available to stay there?
In most cases. Now, in the coldest of the winter, we kind of let that slide. We're not putting anybody out on the street.
Like, is that within a year, or does the clock restart after 6 months if things fall through and they're
Clock
back?
restarts actually after 60 days. They have to be gone 2 months, and then they can come back.
And they can start the process again?
Yes, sir.
No further questions?
One more question. I think we've been told in the past, some people choose to opt out of staying in shelters due to rules and regulations, possibly at the shelters, and they choose to live maybe out of doors due to some of the rules they don't want to abide by. Is this something that you come in, that you see often?
Yes, sir. I mean, I can't say that doesn't happen. There is a population down by the river, but that is not anymore the majority of who we see. It honestly isn't. There are some people don't want to. We breathalyze. Some people don't want to do that. They don't want to give up those activities, but it's not the majority of the people we see anymore.
Is that a requirement to be breathalyzed to stay the night?
We don't breathalyze everyone coming through the door every night anymore. It just got to be a little cumbersome. But we'll pick a couple people randomly through, and then if we smell alcohol or there's any questionable behavior, we'll breathalyze you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
members of council, the Scranton Housing Authority is a federally funded municipal authority, and we have 1,221 public housing units throughout the city on 10 different sites. Additionally, we run what they call the Section 8 voucher program, and we're entitled to 1,050 vouchers through that program. Right now, we have 759 participants. We are not fully funded on that, so we're not able to get to that higher number. In addition, we just opened the list again for Section 8 applications on Friday, and we've already received over 500 applicants. So unfortunately, probably by the end of the month, we'll be closing that list and processing those applications, and hopefully get maybe another 50 to 100 people on the program over the course of the next year. And in addition to that, we have a subset of Section 8 vouchers. There's project-based vouchers, such as the Goodwill program on North Scranton Junior High, and what that is the voucher goes to the site. Section 8 regular voucher holders obtain a voucher from us, and their obligation is to go find an apartment. We would inspect it and approve it. So they could take the voucher anywhere in the city as long as the unit was approved. Also, we have what they call the Veteran Affairs Supportive Housing, the VASH program. It's administered by the VA, and it's strictly for veterans, and they're eligible through the VA, but we house them at different locations throughout the city on a voucher as well. And we have about 35 people on that right now. And that number is pretty consistent for the last several years. So if we were able to obtain more, we would certainly welcome it, but that's completely dictated by the Veterans Affairs in Wilkes-Barre. With regards to public housing, we have, as I said, 1,221 units, but right now there's only 37 vacancies. And just so council's aware, we are obligated to keep occupancy at 97%, or we lose funding. Right now we're about 95.5%, so we have a little work to do there. Similarly, on the Section 8 program, we're obligated to be at 95%. Right now, we're at 93%. That's why we opened up our list for more applicants, and hopefully we can obtain those percentages within the next several months. And one additional item, just to give you an idea of the funding standards for Section 8. In other words, if we are giving the voucher to a single person, they could get an efficiency, but the maximum they would be funded at is $803, or a one-bedroom would be $939. That could be a single or husband and wife. And it goes all the way up to a six-bedroom, which is roughly $2,100. And that market rate is set by HUD and approved through Philadelphia office, but it's geographically designated for certain. Philadelphia would have a different rate than us, in other words. So right now, it's very difficult. We're being told by our voucher holders to obtain housing within those standards. So there's a little bit of a backlog because the price and the market out there is a little higher than what's established by HUD for us. So we're running into a slight problem on that front.
So if it's say 900 is the max, right, for Section 8 for the most part?
Depending on the dwelling size.
I'll say two bedrooms, whatever.
Two bedroom, okay.
900, and then, of course, I know they have to pay the difference to the landlord, but, if it's 1,100 or 1,200, that's the responsibility of the renter. So is that reasonable now, or are they 1,200, 1,400? Like, I hear all these horror stories.
My understanding is it's higher than the standard, like the two-bedroom.
Well, it's definitely higher than 900, I get that.
I'm going to say $200 to $300 higher.
Right, as the average, because I hear horror stories about
Yeah.
apartments that, one bedroom is 1,100, and
Yes.
I don't know if that's true. I just want to, trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it's true.
Yes.
We do housing counseling at United Neighborhood Centers. We serve around 500 people annually doing just that, apartment searches, eviction prevention, and lucky we are right now to be able to help somebody secure, say, a two-bedroom in the 1,400, 1,500. That's pretty standard and average.
Wow.
Mr. Lynott, you said you have 1,221 units.
Yes.
And 37 vacant. 37 vacant, are they on a cycle of refurbing, or are they like ready to move in tomorrow?
Though they're we have what we call unit turnaround. It takes X amount of days to, depending on the condition from the prior tenancy. Some are in eviction, some are in eviction appeal, so we can't utilize each one. We have 16 units at Valley View under construction, so they're actually taken off that list, so they're not considered part of the 95 or 96%. Okay. And we also had 4 units down in Riverside Apartments. That was a fire, unfortunately, 2 years ago. So we get those back online. We'll have a couple more units, but Councilman, it's a steady turnover of between 20 and 50 units all the time with evictions and other issues.
So when you come up with that 37, that's going to be about average at all times?
Yes.
Okay.
Carl, what's the vetting process? What's the vetting process in terms of when there are available apartments, whether it's Adams High Rise or what's the one in Greenridge?
That's separate. Public housing, as you apply, we generate a list based upon preferences. Natural disaster would be the highest score you could get, and you would be on the top of the list once your application was processed.
Okay.
Or domestic violence, or a fire victim. And then it goes down, and I think it goes from 7 to 1, but 7 being the highest, 1 the lowest, but then you would be placed on a 1-bedroom list or a 2-bedroom list, and so on and so forth. And whatever apartment came up on the list next, you would be offered that apartment. So unfortunately, if you didn't like that apartment, you go back down on the bottom of the list and start all over. So, but you don't have a choice as to Adams or Valley View or Washington Plaza. It's
When your number comes up, you got to take the most available apartment or whatever it is.
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
I do have a question on your Section 8 vouchers. You say you have 1,050 Section 8 vouchers, 759 of which are used at this time. Are there no apartments available to use the other vouchers, or do you wait till you come down to a specific amount and reopen to accept more applications?
It's a different type of process, but we get funded by the amount of people we put on the program.
Okay.
But in order to catch up with, say, 800, we're at 760 now. To get up to 800, we would need X amount of dollars from HUD.
Okay.
We get about $470,000 a month now. If we put more people on the program, they would fund us accordingly, but it may not catch up for 2 months. So we have to be careful with that. But we've never been fully funded at that 1,050 amount.
Okay. But they say that we can be funded at 1,000.
Conceivably, in a perfect scenario, yes, but realistically, no.
Okay.
So you say there's minimums for the vouchers, right, to get funded. Is there a maximum? Is there a cap? Like, where you only get enough funding for so many and that's it? You said there's a minimum to get the funding, but is there a max?
As far as the percentage, you mean?
Yeah, you said, well, I forget what you said. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but
The funding we get is...
you said 97%.
Yeah.
Right? What, could it go to 100 and that's it? Or
Yes.
After that, you're no longer funded beyond 100%?
That's
So,
correct.
and these vouchers you speak of that say you're not going to use in the housing authority, you have to go and have a landlord that is willing to rent to you, right?
Yes, there's many local landlords that do participate and accept it, but again, the market's going to drive that, and Lisa has a better idea on that, but our standards are set by HUD, and we can't
Right.
vary from that.
So right now, the total is 1,050, right? 1,050 Section 8 vouchers,
Conceivably, yes.
and you have 759 that are participating
Yes.
currently. So you have about 291,
Correct.
open, available.
But not the funding. We don't have the complete funding for that. And that figure, just so you're aware, does encompass the VASH participants and the public, or the project-based vouchers as well, which is, like I said, it's Goodwill and some UNC properties and,
Yeah, that's additional
Yeah.
units or additional
but
places.
they're all part of that 759 number.
Gotcha. So,
Okay.
so those are part of the 759, but not the total?
Yes.
Okay. So you said you have about 500, you opened up the process on Friday, you have about 500 as of now. You have about 290, say, open possibly, but without the funding. On a usual year or a usual time when you would open up this process, there's got to be parameters to get into Section 8, correct?
That's correct.
So is this usual numbers, or is this extremely large numbers for this process?
As far as the applicants?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that number is probably comparable to the last time we opened the list. That demand is out there, but I can't say exactly, but it's pretty similar, I would say.
Okay, so it's similar than the last time. When was the last time that you opened up the process? And sorry, I'm
I'm
just
going to say
asking.
5-6 years ago.
Okay, so 5 or 6 years ago, you opened it up, and it was pretty similar numbers
Yeah.
right now as to 5 or 6 years ago?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
But there's still when you talk about 750 Section 8 vouchers, those include people that have them right now,
Well,
correct?
that's exactly what it is.
Right.
Yes.
So when you have 500 applicants, and then you said something about 50 to 100 that you think you might be
The
able to...
500 applicants are brand new. They haven't even been processed. None of those 500 have a voucher. We're just beginning the process of submitting them and approving them, so.
Right, but
And
there's...
this also might not be one that you know offhand, but out of, say, however many come in that apply for the process, how many normally get approved? Do you know that percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head. There's very little that, we do background checks and rental history, but I'm going to say the vast majority, maybe 80-85% are going to get in
Okay.
approved, but they're going to go on a waiting list.
Okay.
They might sit on a waiting list for 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
Carl, what would cause someone to be evicted? What would cause someone to be evicted?
To be evicted
Yeah,
from public housing,
yes.
a couple basic ones. We go back 7 years, and it's any felony. I'm sorry, that's the background check to get in. Evictions are any lease violation, non-payment of rent. A new one is smoking on the premises. It's prohibited by federal law. If you were to commit a crime on the site or near the site, you could be evicted for that as well. Fighting with your tenants, fellow tenants or staff. But the main one would be back rent. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, just to follow up on that, I think one of the greatest challenges that we're facing right now is what has happened to the rental market in this community. What was difficult, I think, pre-COVID was, just sort of blew up throughout the COVID pandemic. It was very normal in 2019 to locate a two-bedroom decent apartment, not fantastic, decent, in the city of Scranton for about $800 or so. And that was considered affordable. And those, as I said earlier, what are now going for like $1,400, $1,500, and sometimes higher than that. Just to continue really what Harry was saying too about, what affordable housing looks like and what it is too, is it's intended for I mean, this is the person who makes $42,000 a year, has one child maybe, is looking for a two-bedroom apartment. It's not the lowest income housing. These are, our friends and neighbors and everybody that's working and supporting the city in ways, in schools and hopefully police officers and, other employees. I think what we've seen happen in the past few years is this, that the cycle has really kind of been beat up in housing. The rents skyrocketed, interest rates went up, so people weren't buying new homes at that level and moving out of those, affordable, decent 2 to 3 bedrooms and freeing that up. So there's really been a lock on things. So not only has it been challenging, and we're seeing so many evictions, so many people moving out of these apartments that they could no longer afford because the rents have gone up so high. Social service agencies and county officials, agencies like ours, are paying tens of thousands of dollars monthly to try to provide shelter options, which in this community for families with children, really means hotels. So it's an outrageous cost. It's not really cost effective to continue doing that. But until we have a better solution to the housing crisis, it's kind of where we're at. And another way that we're addressing this is through development, like our Community Development Corporation, and that's not without its challenges either, developing new housing in Scranton. I think it's, some of the areas that we're making strides are like in this assessment and freeing up, identifying properties that maybe, have potential to be developed into affordable housing, get some more units back on the market. That's going to go a long way. Another challenge is really costs. What we use in order to develop these affordable housing apartments use a lot of funding from the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which used to pay for about 70% or so of a housing development. Now, because of the cost of construction and otherwise, covers about 50% of the project. So coming up with the secondary financing, the grant support, the other financing support to be able to build these units and get them back on the market. I know I'm rambling a little bit. Like I said, there's just, I think, several areas where housing has become quite a challenge in the city, not unlike every other part, as the mayor indicated earlier. This isn't unique, but certainly it is affecting us in a big way.
So as you know, that you were inundated with a series of studies that our organization did related to housing, and I would like to stress that the challenge we're facing here is not just with rental housing, but it's also with home ownership. The problem that we've been facing regionally has been in existence for about a decade, where it got exacerbated by COVID, and then the external influences like Lisa talked about, people remaining in their homes and interest rates going up. But it's basic economics for both home ownership and rental. So when you have constrained supply and demand goes up, the price goes up. And we have a constrained supply because basically there hasn't been any new building, not just in the city of Scranton, but in the county for decades and decades. Our aging housing stock is a challenge, and that brings along blight, where some of the housing stock is not even usable. And then you have a situation where we saw population increases in terms of people moving to the city from other areas, in part because of COVID and the ability to telecommute, but in part the population growth regionally has been part of this, what we call the westward migration, that has really been in place since 2010, where people leaving the main suburbs of New York, moving to New Jersey, and then kept going further west, landed in the Poconos, which accounted for the major increase in population and cost of living in the Poconos in the early 2000s, were the next step. And what we're seeing is people have been moving here from two distinct demographic groups. The low to moderate income folks that are renting, or families were joining together to buy a single family home and having multiple generations live under one roof. And then the middle to upper middle income that were buying the homes in the suburbs that are like $300,000, $400,000 that are close to $1 million in the major communities. So We've also seen people leave the city of Scranton and move to the suburbs as their income has increased, and therefore we're left with the city of Scranton that has lower per capita income and lower household income than most communities and the county as a whole. So that's contributed to the problem. And what we're seeing is a whole void of achievable housing. I hate to use the word affordable. People automatically assume that means subsidize, and they get a perception and image in their mind that they don't want in their neighborhoods or communities. But what we're facing is an issue of achievable housing, where, for example, young college graduates going into the workforce for the first time either can't take a job, live at home, or end up paying 50% of their starting salary for housing. So that obviously becomes a challenge. And I know that from the perspective of a parent as and an employer, because I have a 20-something-year-old with his master's degree, and if he moved out, about 55% of his wages would be paying rent. I also have a research analyst that is living at home with her parents in Raritan, New Jersey, because I can't find her a place to live up here that she could afford to live on, knowing the salary that I pay her. But so there's that anecdotal evidence, but it spans generations, it spans types of housing and different demographic groups. Wages have been increasing. We all saw that as a result of COVID. As the workforce contracted, it drove wages up, but housing increased at a faster rate. So nobody really got ahead. And as Lisa had indicated, that's a result of people then staying in their homes, afraid to move, knowing that even if they got a great price in selling their homes, they have nothing to buy. And so it kind of stalled the market as a whole. Now, I know people will point to, well, look at all the development in downtown Scranton, all the new apartment buildings. Well, the bottom line is those apartment buildings have created a new market level, and there would essentially be what I would call above market rate housing. And they're appealing to the medical students and the medical residents that are in town that sadly add the cost of rent to their school loans, so they're not paying it right away because they're trying to get through those particular programs. They're also attracting seasoned business leaders that are buying or renting apartments and then leaving the city on the weekends to go to their homes. I was told Lake Winola and Lake Wallenpaupack are big draws. But when we talk about housing, we need to be all-encompassing. It's not just rental, it's home ownership. It's entry-level homes and entry-level apartments for those recent college grads. It's senior housing for those people that want to age in place. We also have to look at family housing and what we'll call accessible housing. This region has a larger percent of people with a variety of physical, auditory, and visual disabilities. And so certain types of housing are needed where they can live independently. And there's more of a demand for that kind of housing than there is supply. And the Commonwealth has that data in place that can demonstrate the deficit that actually exists statewide. And I think the most important factor to consider is housing is one of the major social determinants of health. And it is considered the most important because individuals without consistent, reliable housing are usually not employed or can't maintain employment. It affects children's academic performance and, of course, their physical and mental well-being. And the more we take away that opportunity to have a roof over an individual's head, the more that creates drain on social services to sort of fill the gaps that lack of housing creates. So we do have a few thousand more pages of data on the social determinants of health to add to the reports that we already gave you. And I just wanted to tell you more the story of what's happening rather than quote numbers and statistics, and encourage you to, in your time, look at the executive summaries of those reports and reach out to our organization with any questions. We'd be glad to provide you with additional information.
So what I'm hearing you say is at each of these levels, there's a need for housing, whether it be higher housing, mid, moderate, low housing. We've had a lot of, we've had a lot of housing construction in the last few years. We have some of the housing on Dixon. We have the North Scranton Junior High School apartments. We've had Marshall, some of these older buildings that we're revamping. We've had downtown apartments. We have the new Laceworks. Are there more units and more apartments? Have there been more added to the city in the last, say, 10 years?
Other than the ones you've said in the major adaptive reuse buildings in downtown, I'm not aware of any other new building.
So we need, I guess the question would be, do we need more houses in numbers or the right type of specific housing in each of these categories?
Kind of a little bit of both. We need to increase the supply of the different types of housing, the multifamily and the opportunities for home ownership, but we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we need to serve families as well as seniors, as well as those with some disabilities. So it's broad. And like I said, the big challenge is all over northeastern Pennsylvania, we have not seen expansive housing development, which has really caused this crunch in supply. And it's not just us, although I have to say northeastern Pennsylvania, Lackawanna and Luzerne County in particular, had less building than most other areas of the state and across the country in the past decade.
Thank you.
Is there anything planned in our near future for accessible housing or any kind of federal housing projects that are coming to our area or that are being looked at right now?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, our Community Development Corporation, we have applied for tax credits to develop 40 units of senior and family housing in the Pinebrook neighborhood.
In which one?
The Pinebrook neighborhood, it's the corner of Olive Street and Caucus Avenue, actually. There's property there. If we're successful, when we're successful, hopefully we can get more units back on the, but it's in all likelihood a few years in the works. We're working on a smaller project on Caucus Avenue across from the John Adams School, which will create 3 units of housing in a small building there. I think the city's partnership with the Scranton Area Foundation to identify these properties in the city is going to go a long way to help us figure out, further opportunities for development.
Yeah,
And what agency are you from? I can't see your name.
I'm sorry, United Neighborhood Centers?
I think it's important to note that United Neighborhood Centers, is it 68 units that you currently have? So when you think about housing development, it's not always something that looks like the housing authority developments. There's also lots of these different solutions that UNC or ACE might have a single family or a 4-family home throughout the neighborhoods of our city that you wouldn't realize are achievable, affordable. They're kind of interspersed, and that's, I think, one big opportunity we do have in the city is we have parcels that the city owns through various means that we could potentially, work with someone to develop. And we wouldn't build them ourselves, we wouldn't run those houses ourselves, but there are areas that you could do some infill, which is important. And the senior housing thing is a really important aspect. That's why I wanted AARP's voice to be at the table. You think about all of the tall, skinny, multi-story houses that we have. We also want people to age in place. It's really hard to ask someone in their 80s, 90s to age in place when the bathroom is on a different floor than the kitchen or the bedroom, right? A lot of our housing stock is really beautiful and historic, but it doesn't work very well for how long people are living and how much we encourage people to be able to stay at home. So we do have a mismatch on some of these things. We need more of the one-level housing, senior housing, especially on those one levels, one story. Not even one story, but just one level with elevators. Those are expensive to build, though, so we've got to make sure that we have that stock, though. We want people that grow up in North Scranton to be able to age in North Scranton, same with all of our different neighborhoods, and we have a real gap there of those places that people could move into to age with dignity. So with that, I'll kick it to Shaquera for the closeout, and then I'll close it out.
I'm just going to basically corroborate most of, really everything that my colleagues at the table has stated. One of the core missions of the Redevelopment Authority is to bridge ideas and investment, economic development initiatives between the private sector and the public sector. So with that being a part of the driving force of the initiative, it was my role to actually meet with a number of the people at this table and other organizations to just kind of get a basic understanding of the needs assessments of housing affordability here in the city of Scranton. I want to also kind of segue off of your line, I do not like using the term affordable housing. I do prefer obtainable and/or achievable housing because the face of housing disparity has changed greatly over the last 5 years, significantly during the years of the pandemic. I had the opportunity to sit on a regional housing advisory board, which spearheads the continuum of care in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and deals greatly with homelessness and what the face of homelessness is in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And to kind of segue off of Harry saying that it's no longer your addicts, it's not really filled with people with mental health issues. Those certainly are a part of the demographic, absolutely. But there's a different face to it, and it is our workforce. It is people that are full-time employed that cannot afford to live in the towns that they work in. That gap is broadening to a ratio where one of the homeless shelters I used to volunteer for saw 30% of their 50-bed capacity patronage being full-time employed. So what it just is saying is that your garbage men, your mail carriers, your teachers in some instances, your city workers, are not able to afford to live in the towns that they actually reside in. One of the things that we can do is build capacity. Actually, that is probably one of the only solutions to this problem, is that while wages are on the rise and while income is definitely increasing, the housing market has quadrupled that number. I've had the opportunity to speak to a number of landlords to talk about the possibility of affordability or sustainable rental rates, and ask them, why would you increase a unit rate from $900 to $1,450 with no rehabilitation, with no changes to the unit structure? And the response to me was, because I can. And that's the bottom line. Our greedflation has allowed us an opportunity to put these obscene market rate rental hikes just basically because you can. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be able to. I'm saying there's got to be a way to combat it and allow for people that are gainfully employed, that allow for people that are on fixed incomes, that have done their due diligence, our senior citizens, our veterans, people that cannot afford to live in decent, safe housing downtown, and through the development and through the resource of workforce and obtainable housing. So I just wanted to lend my voice to that and not continue to ramble on.
So I think a term they used was build capacity. What does that mean?
It's basically an influx of housing development. One of the things that the SRA is looking to as a part of their ongoing marching orders, especially as all of the studies come back, is future development of additional units to a larger scale capacity. So outreach also to developers that are looking to develop achievable housing, looking for different ways that the SRA can leverage fundability and opportunities to attract developers to maybe look at the mixed income housing development model, just to kind of get more units in there, as many as you can.
This is new builds, or this is refurbishing old homes?
I think it should be a combination of both. It's going to be scattered sites largely throughout the city of Scranton, but I think that the repurposes of historical building sites is a wonderful idea. I love what Goodwill did over in North Scranton with the school over there. I think that's a stellar type of project, but we also do realize that there will be some vacant land to do some other scattered site development as well.
And there's a few.
Oh, scattered site development is when you can't get large clusters of land together. So I had the opportunity to tour one of UNC's developments in Carbondale. They had 10 acres. They did a phenomenal job in creating mixed income housing development that allowed for aging in place. It was beautiful. However, finding that kind of depth in land in the city of Scranton is going to be really difficult. So what you do is you identify your areas that have combined parcels, multitude of lots. You kind of subdivide, rejoin them together, and you can make a larger project, but you can only do that throughout the city. So you identify, the Forsyth group study will help us identify some good housing development initiatives scattered site throughout Scranton.
And there's some housing development being talked about either in Valley View or Hilltop in those areas, correct?
There is, absolutely. So there was a couple of asks to the SRA in letters of support for a number of some development initiatives, Quandel being one of them.
And everyone here is on the unhomed task force? You said that in the start.
Certainly, yeah, it's not the Institute or the Redevelopment Authority formally, but UNC certainly, and Catholic Social Services, the Housing Authority. So it's a key piece. And there's overlap on all of these issues, but.
How long has that task force been around?
When did we start it? Summer? I want to say summer of last year.
Summer of last year. Do you know how many times you've met?
Three, I think. I haven't been at every meeting. I was at the one in January. So I think it's important, there's pieces of all of this is important. We started off February with 2 city employees making better than $15 an hour, because we've been very specific to make sure all of our salaries are more than $15 an hour. We started February with 2 employees facing homelessness. Luckily, we were able to, with the help of UNC and others, get each of them to a place where they have housing now. But that's another thing to take away of how the affordability is such a crunch. If we have city employees that are making, what we used to consider a good wage, not able to find affordable housing in the city, then we know we've got to figure something out. When we talk about building more potentially, we talk about different things that might be coming to pass, whether it's a project that's looking for funding by a developer, or a project that is going in one of those warehouses. A lot of the developers are doing great jobs there, and they often don't ask for any federal or state or local funding, which is also great. We've got UNC during those. We've got to figure out the housing crisis for families and seniors. We also want to grow, right? So the idea that we would just want to stay stagnant and have development happen outside the city but not in the city, that's going to mean that we're not getting the EIT, we're not getting the real estate taxes that we could from those developments. So we have to, we can't just look at housing in a vacuum. We have to think about it globally and think about where we want to go as a city. We want to grow. We want more kids in our school district. We want kids to have the opportunity to have great jobs. We want companies to come here. And what do companies look at? They're going to look at the availability of housing. They're going to look at, are there places for people to live, from the people that are cleaning the factory overnight to the CFO that I'm trying to pull in, and have their family built by one of our older, bigger homes. We've got to think about those things too, that if we don't build out the housing stock, it's going to be tougher for us to recruit the type of jobs and the type of workforce opportunities that we want to see in the city.
Mayor, have any of you had discussions with the local developers that have been converting a lot of the buildings in Scranton to apartments, townhouses? I know the majority of them are all like high-end.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Have there been discussions about possibly them working with HUD or whatever in converting some buildings into affordable housing?
Yeah. So.
And is there any interest from any of those developers?
So we had a good conversation with our core team, group of developers in late January, talking about generally like what kind of the things that we've done, decreasing permit fees and rental registration programs to, reward the good landlords and try to get the bad ones to step up their game. We know that they're interested in building more, and I think, Shaquera, you've had some conversations that there might be an interest in some of that.
I've had a couple of meetings with a few of the developers here in Scranton, and they're very much interested in the possibility of developing some mixed-income apartments. Frank Dubas actually has a tax credit application in that he's waiting on for his development of the 500 block at Lackawanna Avenue. I also have a scheduled meeting with developer Don Rinaldi to talk about the possibility of marrying tax credits with some other incentives for developers that are typically into market rate development, make them consider some other options to allow for a more mixed income archetype.
Yeah, so I think we're in the conversation, which is great. I think it's important to note that we the administration are not proposing any sort of hard and fast percentage. Some cities do that. Some cities say, by ordinance, you must, if you're going to develop this amount of housing, you must have 10, 15% at certain income levels. I'm not interested in proposing that at this time. I think we need more of all types of housing. It would be also great if, some of these developers wanted to opt in to participating and creating that type of housing.
So what type of housing is it we're talking about? I mean, I've heard we need housing at all different levels, but,
Right.
so is housing in all different levels, but it's not affordable to that end. I mean, that's the piece I'm not catching here. We do have a lot of development that happened in the city recently. All of these apartments are not filled, but
When the developers put a new building online, they fill up immediately. I mean, there's rarely an opening in one of the downtown buildings.
But we're looking for new building and new units for people in all different levels. So how are we attacking, this conversation seems to be all over the place when it comes to what kind of housing we're talking about.
So the point of the discussion is to just give the picture that we need housing of all different types, and it's going to take a host of different solutions, from solutions that the Housing Authority might have to solutions that the Catholic Social Services might be able to step up, or other nonprofits might be able to, not necessarily in permanent housing, but potentially, you never know. UNC has a playbook that they would like to continue to replicate. ACE, we just cut the ribbon on another ACE property that they were able to put together, and that was in the Hill section off of Olive Street. There's the larger developers and the different warehouses that they're converting. There's all sorts of solution to this. There's potentially in North Scranton there could be a solution for senior housing to build kind of a senior community with those units. That would be great to be able to age in place. So the point is we need all of it, and we want to do it in a way that everybody's at the table and everybody's having these discussions, and that we're all supporting it, and that the funding is efficient. We have home rescue plan dollars, we have other federal funds. We want to be able to see the horizon there, though, and not just fund one project with our home ARPA dollars. We want to be able to see what other projects might be out there and be as efficient as we can be with our dollars. But at the end of the day, I mean, this isn't the city building housing, right? The city sets the table, gets people in the discussion, is supportive, helps in ways like our rental registration program, right? That's helping us make our housing stock that we have safer. It's getting better landlords. It's trying to push out the bad ones, because we're going to come make you get your houses up to code. There's a lot of things the city does, but we're not going to be the ones building the housing ourselves. But we want to make that point of the affordability, it's affordability crisis, and calling the housing achievable makes sense. It is an affordability crisis, whether it's the water rate, whether it's housing, whether it's education. There's all sorts of pieces to this. So remember, the audience is you all on the dais. It's also the public, to help folks understand that might not know somebody looking for an apartment might not realize that all of a sudden their rent's gone from $900 to $1,400 in 6 months, and that people are literally not able to afford where they live, and they're facing eviction in some of these cases.
Karl, does HUD offer incentives to developers who want to develop, whether it's a housing project, whether it's converting, an old building like we discussed, into affordable or attainable housing for residents?
Excuse me. HUD has multiple programs, not specifically through a housing authority, but through different opportunities with partnerships and partnering with a nonprofit and a private developer. But right now, we're exploring a couple of those in the city, and it ties in usually with the developer being able to obtain tax credits as well. So that's the way
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but that's through the state.
Right.
Okay.
And could they even parlay that into like applying for RACP grants? I don't know if they would qualify for something like that as well.
They would apply for the
There's multiple funding sources out there to help assist the developer if they were, so inspired to do something like that?
There would be assistance, but most of it would probably be fronted by the developer, and on the back end, they would make money by renting the units.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
When it comes to the homes that you're thinking about in the North Scranton area, could you just give that as an example of how the city would fund and facilitate that?
Right, so we wouldn't fund it. We might use some federal dollars that we get on an annual basis. We also have, the rescue plan included $2.4 million in home funds that we have until 2030 to spend. So it wouldn't be that we're the ones developing the project, but different entities, currently one project has come to us for potential funding. I haven't committed anything, but I said, yes, I'll write a letter saying that we would potentially be able to help with home ARPA dollars for this project. So this isn't city general fund dollars. This isn't the city building anything. This is the city helping to enable more creation of housing, especially when we are talking about, the senior housing. North Scranton, we can talk more about that project.
How many units or how many homes would we be talking on like this project that you were just kind of mentioning? How many units are we thinking about there?
So there was a project that was pitched, actually passed city council 30 years ago, and those folks are back at the table with some new ideas of maybe what it looks like 30 years later and what we could do. We can certainly go through it with you about what it might look like, but it's early stages. But again, that would be something where, the city would help with connecting them to, funds at the state level, maybe funds at the federal level, maybe a portion of our home rescue plan dollars. Obviously, the city would be looking at streets and, we're helping them work with the utilities. There's all those pieces, but it wouldn't be a city-funded project, nor would it be a city-run project. We're not going to start building.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around, like, say, that, for example, this one in North Scranton, what is it that we're thinking about doing? What area? Like, are we looking for a large area to put a lot of homes in?
So there's an area that exists that has been owned by the same owner for 30 years, and they, again, went to city council 30 years ago and passed a plan. They didn't do the plan. They've come back to say, maybe it's time to work on this plan. But they're going to have to figure out who the developer is, all of that type. It's not the city doing that, but they come to the city to see about support and, can we help them navigate that?
Yeah, then we support and kind of facilitate this to occur. And can you explain that a little bit?
So the zoning, the zoning has to be in place. We have to approve all the different plans, the MS4, the stormwater, right? You can't just build something. You have to come to the city and make sure that everything is in line. The same with the state regs, right? So we would make sure that anything with DEP, anytime the land is actually cleared, but there's a whole host of things that have to happen. So again, this is early stages, just an example. One thought, though, is senior housing, is that you'd be able to build out, single family or probably single family homes that are smaller, that are one level, that somebody living in North Scranton in a 3-story, 4-story home right now that's having trouble navigating that as they get older, they could still live in their same neighborhood they grew up in without, having to compromise that. So. And
then we would try to keep the rent down to keep it within their affordability level?
Well, it'd be rent, maybe it'd be, maybe they would sell the homes. It's unclear. Again, that wouldn't be it's not the city that would come in and dictate that. That would be the private market that would dictate that in this case. But it's just getting more ways that we can help people age in place, that we can help families live in safe housing, that we don't have houses all over the city where, multiple families are living in a single family home, right? That's not how they want to live. We don't want that from a safety perspective. We kind of have to meet the demand as best as we can, and we want to be, we want to be a city where people want to live. We also have to make sure they have a place to live.
Anyone else? No? Thank you all for coming, giving your time and all of your information to us. We appreciate it. We'll take a 5-minute recess.